Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. A couple weeks ago, Valerie left a message on the Every Tuesday Facebook wall and asked how to recreate the texture you see here on these ice cream cones. So in this week's tutorial, we're going to cover it all. We're going to start by creating our own halftone pattern, because if I zoom in here, you can see it's a little pixelated, so ours will be much crisper, but it is a halftone pattern. So we're going to create our own halftone pattern, use it as a texture, apply it to this ice cream cone, and then we will have a replicated version. So I brought in a reference photo. I'm giving this whole PSD file away so you can follow along for free. And we'll create our halftone, we'll apply everything. So I just want to start this off by just giving you a little heads up. A lot of these techniques are a little more on the intermediate side. So for the sake of time, I might be moving a little quicker than I normally do. But by all means, just pause as you work along and you should be able to recreate the same thing, no problem. So don't get intimidated by that. It's totally possible. That said, we're going to jump right in and create our halftone pattern. So in order to do that, we need to create a new file by going File, New. And since I'm working in CMYK, this free download file is CMYK and it is 300 ppi for the resolution. So it'll come out very nice if you decide to print this. So we're working in inches, and I'm going to make a 5 by 5 inch artboard. So I'm going to hit OK. And now we need to grab our marquee tool, and I'm just going to freehand a rectangle right here, but I want to make sure there's enough space around the edges because we will be applying a blur for the halftone effect. So I'm going to create a new layer by hitting this icon right here, and I'm going to fill it with black, which is really important. And if you have color over here like I do, all you have to do is click this icon and it'll switch it to black and white. And I want to move the black to the background, so I'm just going to click this arrow to move it to the background. And then a nice little keyboard shortcut is Command Delete or Control Backspace on a PC, and it'll just color that rectangle right in. Then I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on a PC to deselect that selection. And now I'm going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I want a pretty good blur on this. So I would say somewhere around 50 pixels is good. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to go Filter, Pixelate, Color Halftone, and this is what's going to create the halftone effect. By default, mine's set at 8 pixels. Unfortunately, there's no preview here, so you kind of have to go back and forth and test, but I think 8 might be good enough, so we'll hit OK, and that does look great to me. We've got a little bit of repeating, but once we're using it as a texture, it'll be hardly noticeable, so that's fine. So I'm going to hit V on my keyboard just to make sure I got my cursor selected, and now I'm going to click and drag this right into my ice cream file. And now you can see it's nice and small, which is really important because you want it to look like a texture. If it were too big, it would start looking like an element of its own, which we definitely don't want. So I'm just going to drag this layer underneath my reference layer, and I'm going to label this black halftone. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here, and as you can see on this reference, we're going to start by doing this bottom texture right here. So I'm going to bring this texture down, this halftone down, and kind of move it right around where I need it to be. And as you noticed in the reference, this halftone is blue, and it's a darker blue than the background. So I need to color it now. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to create a new layer. I'm going to hit M on my keyboard and create a marquee just like we did previously when we were creating this halftone. And now I need to color a darker color than this background. So I'm going to click on the black because I need it to be in the background once again. I'm going to eyedropper the background, and if I make a selection just straight below where the circle is, it'll just make it darker, and that's it. This is just adding black to it. So I'm going to hit OK when I'm happy with the color, and then once again I'm going to hit Command Delete or Control Backspace if you're on a PC, and now I've got a colored rectangle like I did before. I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on a PC to deselect that selection, and now I'm going to label this layer Color. I'm going to set the blend mode, which is right here. If you toggle it down, select Screen, and now that will apply that color directly onto the black halftone. But as you can see, we've got this really ugly rectangle around it. To get rid of that, we need to apply a clipping mask. So I'm just gonna, on this color layer, I'm gonna right click and choose create clipping mask. So that color masks itself right on top of the layer underneath it, and it only affects the layer straight underneath it, which is really important. So now that we have these two joined together, we're going to group them so they don't separate. So I'm just going to hold Shift on my keyboard and click on the black halftone layer, and then I'm going to hit Command G or Control G on a PC to group them together. Now that I've got a group, I want to make sure I label it because we're going to have a lot of layers in this file. So I'm going to label this dark blue halftone. Okay, so I know that I need 3 of these because I have this dark blue halftone, I have this dark blue halftone, and then this one up here at the top. So I'm going to create 2 more of these. So I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard, click and drag, and that makes a copy. I'm going to do the same thing one more time, and now, so I don't get confused, I'm just going to turn these ones off for now so I don't see them. So back on this dark blue halftone, now we need to mask this away. We're not ever going to use the eraser tool because if you erase something, you can't get it back afterwards. Masking enables you to bring things back that you hide. So it's masking, it's putting a mask on it. So it's hiding it for temporarily or permanently if you don't ever want to reveal it again. So in order to apply a mask, we're going to click this little icon down here at the bottom. And now you can see we've got a mask area. And it's important to remember that black conceals and white reveals. So black hides your artwork and white makes it appear again. So we always use a mask using the brush tool. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard and now I have a brush. And you can see my settings up here. I've got an opacity of 100%. And if I toggle this down, you can see I have a hardness of 0. So this is a very soft brush. If I had it at 100%, then the edges, when I start erasing or masking this halftone away, the edges would be very hard. And I want them to be soft because I want this to feel like a subtle texture. So I'm going to make sure the hardness is set at 0%, and I'm using a 175 pixel radius brush. Okay, so if I start painting the black, you can see it's hiding, it's masking the halftone away. But as I get close to the actual ice cream, I want to be more exact. And as you can see in the reference, I kind of have this white outline right here, and I have a very hard edge right here where the top of the cone is. So in order to do that, whoops, I need to turn my reference off, and right here where you see cone top, I'm going to keep this layer selected, the dark blue halftone, but I'm going to bring my cursor over here to the preview image of cone top. I'm going to hold Command. You can see a little icon appears when I do that. If I'm going to hit Command on my keyboard or Control if you're on a PC, and then I'm just going to click. And you can see that just selects the artwork on that layer. But since I'm on the dark blue halftone layer, anything that I'm going to hit B now. Anything that I brush is only going to be affected where that selection is. So I'm getting rid of everything within that selection. So that's exactly what I need. I'm going to deselect by hitting Command D on a Mac or Control D on a PC. And now I need to get rid of this halftone that's appearing outside of my ice cream cone. So I'm going to come over here to ice cream. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to hold Command and then I'm going to click, or Control and click if you're on a PC. But I don't need to delete the stuff within the ice cream. I need to delete the stuff outside of the ice cream. So I need to invert my selection. And I can do that by hitting Command-Shift-I on a Mac or Control-Shift-I on a PC. And now you can see I've got the dancing ants on the edge of my artboard. So what's selected is everything outside of the ice cream. So now if I paint, you can see it's just getting rid of the stuff outside of the ice cream. Okay, so now I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on a PC to deselect. And now we're going to add in this little white edge right here. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to select my ice cream once again. I'm going to hold Command and click, or Control and click if you're on a PC. And now I need to contract my selection because I need to bring the selection inside. So I'm going to go Select, Modify, Contract. And I'm going to use 16 pixels. So I'm going to hit OK. And now once again, if I were to paint, I would be getting rid of things within the ice cream. So I need to invert the selection once again. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I if you're on a PC. And now I'm going to grab my brush. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and then I'm just going to brush. And you'll notice I'm not going to brush down here, even though I could, because I want that texture to go all the way straight to the cone. But I want the edge of the ice cream to be maintained. Okay, so now if I deselect that, I can hit Command D or Control D on a PC, and now you can see I'm getting very, very close to my reference. But this is a little bit dark, so all I have to do is go to my opacity and change it. Let's see what 50 looks like. That might be a little dark. Let's try 30. That's looking good. So when you zoom out, you can see you've still got this really nice pattern happening right there, this texture. Okay. So I'm just going to jump ahead right now because we're going to do the same exact thing that we just did for the bottom of the ice cream, do the exact same thing for the middle part. Okay, so now we're on to the very top piece. You can see I've got my bottom texture and my middle texture. So now we're going to take care of the top texture. So I'm just going to drag this reserved texture up here. And if I look at my reference photo to see what I need to do, it's very, very subtle. There's just a little bit beyond the little swirl and then a little bit below. So that's what we're gonna copy right now. So I've got my halftone up here, and you can even shrink it if you'd like. If you hit Command T or Control T, you can even make it a little smaller, since technically it would get smaller as you're getting closer to the top. Okay, so I want to make sure I've got a little bit above the swirl. So that looks good. All right, let me move this over a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to apply mask again. So I'm going to click this little icon. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and I'm just going to brush some of this away. I'm masking it away. Okay, so now I'm going to select my ice cream once again. I'm going to hit Command and then click, or Control and then click if you're on a PC. And then I'm going to invert my selection by hitting Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I on a PC, and then I'm just going to brush all of this away. All right, so once again, we need to contract this. So I'm going to deselect, Command D or Control D. I'm going to select my ice cream again. So I'm going to hold Command and click or Control and click. And then I need to go Select, Modify, Contract, and we're going to stay consistent. So we're going to make sure 16 pixels is chosen and hit OK. All right, so then we need to invert the selection once again. So Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I. And now I'm going to brush these edges away. But I'm going to stick to just over here. I don't want to delete this part in the inside. Okay, Command D or Control D to deselect that. And now I've got quite a bit down here and up here that I don't really need, so I'm just gonna brush some more of this away until I've got like the little bit that I really want to show up here. And you can change the size of your brush on your keyboard by hitting your open or close brackets. So that's nice and subtle. And as you saw in the reference, this whole swirl is deleted, and it looks like it was deleted with a hard brush. So we need to change the hardness of our brush. So I'm going to come up here and just go all the way up. And this one you got to be very careful because you don't want to have to do it more than once if you don't have to. So I'm just going to come around. Like that would be the swirl. Okay, so now I'm going to change back to my soft brush. And I'm going to make it nice and big, and I'm going to get rid of all this on the edge so it looks like it just fades out right up at the top. Okay. And I can lower the opacity once again. Let's try 50%. Maybe 30 again. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's make this part a little darker. So if I hit X on my keyboard, now I'm revealing more. And I'm just going to conceal this edge again. Okay, just to show a little more texture there, and that's looking really good. All right, so now we can move on to our cone. So now we can actually use the same pattern that we did before, but we're going to have to change the color. So I'm just going to grab this top one right here. I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard. I'm going to drag it all the way down. So now it's a copy. Make sure you don't drag it on top of one of your other folders, because then the copy would be created within your folder, and you don't want that. You want it separately like it shows right here. Only this time we're going to do dark brown halftone. And where is this? Let me drag it out. All right, you can see it's right here. And I'm going to get rid of this mask because our mask for the cone will be different. So I'm just going to click on the mask and drag it to the trash can and just hit delete. All right, so now we've got a full mask right here, and the opacity is still at 30%. Let's change that to 100 so we can see it really well. And you can see it is this dark blue color, and I'm going to zoom in. Okay, so if I toggle this little group down, I'm going to come over to my color layer, and I'm just going to hit Command and click again. So I'm selecting that color layer, but I'm also on the color layer. And I'm going to eyedropper. I'm going to hit I on my keyboard. I'm going to eyedropper this dark brown color. I'm going to come over here, click it, and I'm going to make it even darker. So I'm just going to come down here a little bit to make a darker brown. Hit OK, and now I'm going to switch these to make sure it's in the background. You can do that by hitting X on your keyboard, or you can click on these little arrows and it'll switch them. And now I'm going to hit Command Delete or Control Backspace if you're on a PC, so that's going to recolor it. Now I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, or Control D if you're on a PC. And I'm going to close up my group again because I don't need to mess with it anymore. I'm going to hit V on my keyboard, so I'm back to my selection tool, and I'm going to position it where I need to on top of the cone. So to establish that position, I'm going to look right here, and it's kind of at an angle, so I'm actually going to rotate this halftone a little bit. So I'm just going to hit Command T or Control T if you're on a PC, and then rotate it kind of the way that I want it. Plus, this will differentiate itself from the cone texture, which is straight up and down. Okay, so now that I'm on top of the cone, I'm making sure I've got a thick amount of halftone all the way to the edge of the cone, because you don't want like all this part to be thick, but then the very edge to get really light. So I want to make sure that the edge is covered up. And now that I'm happy with this position, I'm just going to hit Enter or Return. And now we need to start masking. So I'm going to click on this icon again to create a mask. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard. I'm making sure that black is in the front. Increase the size of my brush, and I'm once again using a very soft brush just to get rid of a little bit on the outside, and maybe a little bit in here too, because it doesn't need to cover the whole top part of the cone, just a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to select the cone top by hovering over, but remember your dark brown halftone is the one that's selected. So I'm going to hover over this preview image. I'm going to hold Control and click. And now I'm going to invert my selection by hitting Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I on a PC. And now I'm going to brush away everything that's on the outside. Once again, I'm going to deselect by hitting Command-D or Control-D. I'm going to select my cone top again by holding Command and clicking, and now I need to bring in that selection. So I'm going to go Select, Modify, Contract. We'll keep it at, let's lower it a little bit because this is a smaller element. So let's lower it to 12 pixels, hit OK. And now invert the selection, Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I on a PC, hit B on your keyboard to activate your brush, and then brush outside. Okay. Command-D or Control-D to deselect, and now you can just lower the opacity. Let's try 20% here and see how that looks far away. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now the only thing that we have left is the bottom part of the cone. So I'm just going to replicate this dark brown halftone by holding Alt on my keyboard, clicking and dragging. And I'm going to get rid of this selection because we're going to need a new selection for the bottom of the cone. So I'm just going to click and drag it into the trash can and hit delete. Okay, so now I can drag this over. Let me increase my opacity so I can see what I'm doing. And let's angle it just a little bit more. So Command-T or Control-T. And angled. Position it. That looks pretty good. All right, so Let's mask it once again. We'll click our little icon. We're gonna select the bottom of the cone by holding Command and clicking or Control and clicking if you're on a PC. And now I'm going to invert the selection. So I'm gonna hit Command Shift I or Control Shift I on a PC. And oops, I did not contract it before I did this, but that's fine. I'm gonna hit B on my keyboard. I'm gonna brush all this away. But now, since we've already got the selection, this kind of skips a step. It's a little confusing because contracting and expanding are very different. If you have just your element selected, you're gonna contract it. But if you have the inverse of your selection selected, you want to expand it. It's the opposite, which is why I've been trying to avoid that by making a few more steps. But now that we're to the end, I think we've got our stuff together. We can do this. So I'm going to go select, modify. This time I'm going to choose expand because the inverse of my selection is selected. And I'm going to change this to 30 pixels and hit OK. All right, so now I'm going to once again brush this away. All right, Command D or Control D on a PC to deselect. And now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to lightly start taking some of this away, masking this away. But I want to keep this a little darker because it's at the bottom. So I'm just going to change the opacity to, let's try 40%. See what that looks like. That looks pretty good. And we can reference. I'm actually thinking the cone part should be a little darker, so let's change this to 30%. That's looking good. Okay, so it looks like the only thing that we have left is the little shadow at the bottom, which is really easy to do. We're going to grab this dark blue once again for the bottom shadow. So I'm just going to grab this dark blue halftone, click, hold Alt, click and drag all the way to the bottom. Actually, it's going to even go beneath the cones and the ice cream. So I'm going to drag it just above the background. I'm going to remove the selection or the mask, hit delete. Let me drag this down here, increase the opacity to 100% so we can see it. And it is the dark blue color this time. And we need to mask it. So I'm going to hit this little mask. And now I'm going to freehand an elliptical marquee. So over here, I'll just select elliptical marquee and drag out a big marquee right underneath that. And now I'm going to hit Command Shift I or Control Shift I on a PC to inverse the selection. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard and I'm going to get rid of all of the halftone outside of it. Now I'm going to deselect by hitting Command D or Control D on a PC. And as you can see, we've got our little shadow, but it's pretty dark. So let's come over here. Let's first set our blend mode to multiply, which will just add a little bit more darkness to it. We're going to change the opacity to 50%. Actually, let's go a little more. Let's go 30%. And now we just need to soften up those edges. So I'm going to come back to masking and I'm just going to come around the edges very soft. This kind of adds a little bit of a blur to the edges so it does look like a shadow. And I'm just freehanding it with the mouse. So it's a little more believable, but we've got that texture in there, and I'm going to zoom out. And you can see that this is a much crisper version of our reference photo. So that's how to add a halftone texture to an image in Photoshop. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them on Facebook, in the video description, anywhere. I'm happy to help. So thanks so much again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.